Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Lazouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we will talk about your transition from a class 1 product to a class 1 air products. So I have a lot of people asking me, what is class 1 air? So mainly this is the new classification that was created by on the EU MDR, which is class 1 for reprocessing. But we'll talk about that more in depth with our guest today. So our guest today is Tautvydas Karitonas, who is the principal at Test Labs. So Tautvydas, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thanks, Munir. Welcome. Yeah, it's nice to be here. Quite excited to talk about it. The topic is quite close to what we're doing. So yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So when we discussed, you explained to me exactly what you are doing and say, okay, maybe this topic can be interesting for our audience because we have some customers that have to do this transition from class 1 to class 1 air. And that can be maybe a good point to explain what should be there, what should they be ready for, what should they create, what should they do to make this transition as smooth as possible. But before to start, maybe just can you introduce yourself for a bit, explaining more about you and what you are doing?
Sure. I actually have an engineering background. So I've spent the last 8 years developing technologies for healthcare, specifically to do with disinfection and preventing infections. But at the moment, my main focus is to accelerate market access to medical devices. So provide this objective evidence that, manufacturers could put into their technical files to get, their market access. So that's where we focus. So I run a lab essentially with quite a few scientists to try and support the medical device industry.
Great.
That's what we focus on at the moment.
Great. And were you hit, if I can say, by this topic of class 1 to class 1 air? Was there some customers that were contacting you to help them on that?
Yeah, I think specifically because we're specialized in IFU validations and sterilization cycles, disinfection, that's our background. We do a lot of compatibility studies, etc. We've realized that we have this sort of niche offering to support surgical instrument manufacturers to transition from class 1 to class 1R. And we do get a lot of questions about what is the process, what do you need to do, etc. So I feel that this is quite a timely conversation for us to be having because we spend a lot of time trying to educate the market to raise awareness that there is a way out. Last year we went to Medica. We've spoken to over 100 surgical instrument manufacturers, and we were getting a lot of questions about, what would be the process you'd follow? How long does it take? How fast can I get the data to try and, push my product through the approval?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So just maybe to reiterate what is happening actually. So before we had our surgical instruments that were class 1, now they are moving to class 1 air. I just want to re-emphasize again that the only products, medical devices that are moving to class 1 air, they are reusable surgical instruments. These are 3 words: reusable surgical instruments. If one of those words is not there, it's not a class 1 air. So reusable surgical instruments only. And those products, mainly they are used during surgery, like scalpel or scissors or clamps or whatever that are used during the surgery. There is a specific definition on the EU MDR where it says when it's for clamping, sewing, cutting, drilling, etc. I mean, there is all the words that they are using there. So as soon as it is reusable, used for surgery, and it's an instrument, then mainly it's falling under that. Just also to add an information to that, there was under the new regulation, the EU MDR, we have this transition period, which says that even after the 26th of May 2021, you can continue to sell your reusable surgical instrument as a class 1, which is self-certified, until the 26th of May 2024, which was the end of the transition period. Now, recently, we had a vote at the EU Commission, which continues to extend again this deadline, and now the new deadline is the 31st of December 2028 for this kind of products that are up classified. We call them the up classified products because they were from class 1 and they move to an upper class where now they need a notified body. So Tautvydas, in terms of that, so before under class 1, they didn't need a notified body, self-certified. So normally they have to create their technical documentation, all the risk, verify everything. I mean, do normally everything that should be done to verify that the product is safe. Now they move to class 1 air. What are the differences now, if I can say, for them, and what are the things that are most difficult for them actually for that?
I think the focus at the moment is to try and, validate I think it starts, with the intended use and your safety data, but then, you draw your IFU, your instructions for use, and suddenly you need to validate certain steps in that IFU, and that's specifically to do with your reprocessing process. And I think that's what was kind of overlooked previously. And I think most of those manufacturers are now kind of waking up to this realization that suddenly you need to provide a lot more data, from certified accredited labs to show that the process that I've selected for my medical device instrument, it's safe to do so. And I think that's where there is some of the confusion. So if you look at your reusable surgical instrument, there's quite a few steps you need to validate to make sure that your process is safe and you can't cause infections, etc. So, and it starts with your cleaning validation, which is the first step. And then you go through your disinfection validation using whatever automated process, in most cases, washer disinfection. And then the final step is your sterilization validation. So these are the 3 steps you need to validate to make sure that your product is safe when reprocessing, to make sure they wouldn't cause an infection after. And then finally, there's a second thing about when you look at your risk benefit analysis, you need to make sure that your product is safe and maintains its function after the reprocessing. So at some point, you need to tell the end user at what point you need to stop using the device because it's unsafe to do so. And that's where the material compatibility studies come into play to show that if I were to reprocess this item 50, 100, 1,000 times, is it still safe to use, whether it maintains its performance? And that's what we do, and that's what you need to follow in order to provide that objective evidence when you submit your technical file to a notifying body.
Yeah, and I had to work with some manufacturers that are Class 1 Air now, or that were Class 1 and moved to Class 1 Air. The funny thing is, when we said to them that yes, they have to validate their cleaning, disinfection, sterilization, etc., they all say to me, "Yeah, but I'm just placing on my instruction for use what my competitor is doing also.
Correct,
I just place the instruction that my competitor is using for the cleaning. So if it's good for them, it's good for me." So maybe this is the idea. Yeah. Do you agree with that, or?
No, we do not. Although by luck, they might kind of stumble across a process that is applicable to their product. But no, you should draw your own instructions for use, and you should look at your own process. I think an example I can give you as well, certain manufacturers obviously have developed a really deep relationship with healthcare. So they would use data from their SSD departments, for example. But that is still anecdotal data. It's really difficult to control some of the parameters to make sure that whether the process is still fully validated. So, so our advice is you need to engage with a laboratory that's sort of certified and equipped to do those steps. Each process, you need to validate your cleaning, your disinfection, your sterilization to get it right. And then you can rest assured that your instructions is absolutely in line with what you expect the end user to do, rather than just kind of guessing and copying from the competitors or and hoping that the process will be adequate and safe. And I'm pretty sure the notifying bodies would look for that evidence. Whatever the process you've prescribed, well, make sure you back that up with objective evidence.
I suppose the auditor, when they will arrive to audit the company, because just a precision, normally for a Class 1 Air, they are not coming to audit specifically the product. They are here more to audit the process of reprocessing. So mainly that. So mainly what they will be doing, they will check this instruction for use, and they will check that they have some evidence that the procedure that was mentioned inside is valid for their products mainly. So, and you as a laboratory that is doing those tests, so you are taking this instruction for use and you are really applying this instruction for use on your test to verify that really what is said here is correct?
Well, mostly what we do is actually we realize that the manufacturers unfortunately don't really have the process. Okay. So we would then advise to say, look, there's standards that you can follow. The standard that we follow at the moment is ISO 17664, which is processing of healthcare products, and it specifically tells you what to do, whether you have a critical or semi-critical or non-critical device. So you don't have to go and kind of make it up. You can just follow a standard. So that's where we start, because most companies have instructions that, as previously mentioned, they either copied or they were kind of his historic stuff. So I think if you look at that standard, then you say whether your product is critical or semi-critical. Most of the work, or the majority of the work that we do, is actually to do with critical or semi-critical products. And then that standard would, kind of swiftly link to whatever the process is, for example, automated disinfection. And there's another standard that they quote, which I believe is ISO 15883 series, which specifically talks then about whether you're using your cleaning process, your disinfection process, whether that's thermal or, or chemical. I think that the part 3 is even talks about endoscopes. So you can definitely narrow that down to your product specifically. And obviously, we're talking about reusable surgical instruments here. And most likely than not, you will use a automated cleaning process. So there's a standard for that. But regardless of the cycle you use, you need to validate that the process is capable of physically removing soiling and removing protein to clean enough level, for you to then to move to your next stage, which is your sterilization. And that's the whole purpose of what you're trying to prove. And if there's a standard, for a notified body, it's a lot easier for them to say you apply the right standard, you do the right stuff, and then you have the right report to back that up.
I imagine also that here we are in the side of the manufacturer, but if we are going in the side of the customer that is buying those products, at a certain point they unpack everything and they start to use them, and then the question is, okay, now I use them, I need to clean them. What should I do? So there is also the question, okay, here is what is written, but I don't have a sterilizer, or I don't have these liquids for that, or I don't have that. So this is also the point where I suppose manufacturers try to also have multiple methodologies available to be able to accommodate as much customer as possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, you've just touched on the very topic that's quite close to our hearts, because we work with healthcare a lot. I think the whole problem of healthcare accepting products and then trying to figure out, how do I clean this? How do I prevent infections? Because at least in the UK, it's a great problem. And, we need to come up with a solution. Well, you're right. They look at it and say, can I actually reprocess that with the facilities and, equipment that's available to us, or to the healthcare in that case? So manufacturers, they're trying to support that. They're trying to validate across, different processes, etc. But mostly, I think the processes that we are working off at the moment are in line with what the NHS in the UK, for example, would use. So most SSD departments would have an automated washing cycle. They would be exposed to whatever the chemicals that you prescribe them to use, and they would have sterilization units specifically for reusable surgical instruments. So I think the good step is to recognize the fact that these are the processes that are being used, and then make sure you validate it against your cycle. And then I guess the healthcare organizations can look at it and say, yeah, that matches my capabilities, or I can rest assured I'm doing the right thing in line with manufacturer's instructions, because you'd be surprised probably how many items would go through the process without actually being in line with the process that the manufacturers would prescribe.
And this is an important point here. Manufacturers are liable, if I can say, for what they are putting on the market and the instruction they are providing. In the case, for example, I suppose the healthcare facility is not following the instruction of the manufacturer, and then the product is not good or not well reprocessed or not good enough for that. It's not the fault of the manufacturer, I suppose.
No, but I think there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes. I know we specifically talk about surgical instruments, but this issue of what happens in reality and what manufacturers think is happening with the products, there's a big disconnect. There's a big gap, and we see that with any medical product, whether that's a piece of clinical furniture or the CT scanner. I know I'm kind of straying from the topic here, but we do joke a lot sometimes that you can buy a shirt for £5 and has more care instructions to make sure it doesn't shrink than your medical device. So we're saying that shouldn't be the case. But healthcare are able to absorb all of that noise and say, well, how do we make sure we protect infections? That's why we have IPC themes, et cetera, et cetera. But what should happen is that medical device manufacturers work really closely to understand the processes, so they can design products and validate IFUs that are actually in line with what actually happens. And suddenly you reduce the risk of infection, you reduce the risk of product failure. I think with reusable surgical instruments, it's a lot more prescribed and it's easier to get it right. But for any other medical device, a hospital bed, a CT scanner, infusion pump, it's a bit more complex, because these products are exposed to, from 70% ethanol to 1,000 ppm chlorine. But I think what needs to happen, you should have a conversation, with your end user, and you should understand their needs, and then obviously try and influence the whatever the information you put into a technical file to support what actually happens in the real world.
Exactly.
Luckily for surgical instruments, there's a standard for sterilization for healthcare products. I think it's ISO 11137, which specifically tells you, what do you need to do for any process, whether that's steam sterilization, whether that's gamma, ethylene oxide, it prescribes you those tests, and then you know what to do to try and achieve your your whatever the sterility level, assurance level you want to get. So again, you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel, as we say. There's specific standards that you can so I suppose apply to your product based on your intended use to try and get the outcome. And I'm pretty sure healthcare would recognize that, because one way or the other, they would either use steam sterilization or gamma or ethylene oxide, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that hard to try and align your IFU with what actually happens in real world.
Hey, just a second. Do you need a EU, Swiss or UK representative? Then choose Easy Medical Device. We can represent you and also become your importer. Contact us at eo@easymedicaldevice.com. Exactly. And if we come back to notified bodies that are coming here normally to verify that all what is mentioned and is following the regulation. So all those standards that you mentioned, for example, they will maybe check also that and check if this is really available there. So in terms of documentation, for example, so the notified body are checking that the manufacturer is doing correctly. They are also checking that the laboratory is accredited and is really doing this job also, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's really interesting because, a couple of minutes ago, I've mentioned that certain manufacturers would choose to partner with, healthcare organizations, with their sterile departments, to say, look, can I just use your process to try and validate the fact that my product is safe? And it's good. In the absence of anything better, I'd say that's a good option. However, what you need to understand is this isn't just pushing, a surgical instrument for a single cycle and saying it's all okay. As a certified or accredited lab, you geared up to measure every single parameter. We just spoke about washer disinfection or thermal disinfection, etc. You do a study where you monitor the temperature to make sure you're able to get these defined parameters that will achieve that level of efficacy. We do a lot of, you'd spike the actual product with an organism, and then you try and push that for a sterilization cycle to see if it actually died, or whether you achieve the log reduction. And that's the evidence that the notified bodies would look for specific to your product. We've just previously spoke about working out the worst case. Every single device could have a different outcome. So you need to pick your products. You need to make sure you have a baseline contamination level, and you validate your cleaning, you validate your disinfection cycle, sterilization cycle, and you have that evidence for your product rather than kind of piggybacking on somebody else's process. So I feel when you look at labs, you need to make sure you choose labs that are actually geared up to do that. They have all the right certification or accreditation, the right equipment. So when you get that report, none of the data is missing. Because it'd be so disappointing to get a report from an SSD department and say, yeah, we pushed it through a process. But what were the cycle parameters? Is it half cycle? Is it full cycle? What was the log reduction? Did you use a BI? What type of BI? You're exposed to so many questions that notifying bodies would ask and say, look, I don't think you have control over this process. And if you don't have control over that process, there's no way you can prescribe the process in the IFU. So it's all left to, it's quite subjective at that point. And you sort of at the mercy of, whatever you can get from, healthcare organization.
Exactly. And this is maybe small mistakes that some manufacturers are doing because it's the first time they have to do, as I said before with class 1. They didn't have all those things, even if for me they have to do it anyway. They didn't have, if I can say, the notified body looking at that specifically. So it was maybe done, but not done correctly. Yeah. Now we have notified bodies looking at that, so they have maybe more scrutiny on the documentation. Do you have other mistakes that companies are doing, or something that maybe we can tell them, oh, this is one, maybe there is another one here that they are doing a lot?
Yeah, I can give you an example. We've dealt with quite a few companies, and I think the first thing they say, well, can I do it myself? I have an autoclave or whatever. And we say, yeah, absolutely. If you can have enough objective evidence to support, to have a meaningful conversation with your notified body to rest assured that what you've done is correct, fine. There's absolutely no reason why you can't do it. However, can you track your your temperature? Can you track all the parameters that you put your stamp on to say that they happen? So the first mistake, sometimes I feel that companies underestimate the level of detail they need to have in their reports and the level of objectiveness as well. When you use an independent lab, that these guys have the sole interest is to provide objective evidence to make sure the product is safe. Suddenly, when you test your own product, regardless of your QMS system, you're still inclined to make sure it's fine. And I think that's something, that you need to be aware of when you talk to notifying body. It's not unreasonable for you to ask what quality system you have in place to make sure that these results that suddenly look at are totally objective. So the first mistake is to underestimate the level of detail and the capabilities you need to have. Second of all, interpretation of standards. We'd get customers saying, "I just need you to validate the sterilization process." Well, we say, no, you need to take a couple of steps back. You need to validate firstly if what you're going to submit into an autoclave is actually clean. So that's why we need to do the whole. We use like something like Edinburgh soil. I'm not a microbiologist, but I listen to the guys in the lab. To make sure that firstly the products are cleaned automatically or whatever the process before you submit for disinfection. So some of the mistakes is that manufacturers suddenly take control over the interpretation of the standard, and as a lab, we're trying to say, no, these are the steps you need to take to get to the right results, plus the validation work. We find it sometimes really difficult to explain that if we're spiking your ophthalmic instruments, for example, with a Geobacillus spores, we need to validate the fact that we can recover it, so that if you claim your log6 reduction, it's indeed log6 reduction. So that's the second mistake, where you interpret your own standard and you're set on, I just need that, without actually looking at the bigger picture of your risk and benefit file.
Okay.
And thirdly, I think the risk and benefit file is being overlooked as well. If you've identified there's a risk that this product can fail, after 100 processes, you should do that test. You can't, you should say at what point you should stop using that. So that's the third mistake, where you don't do enough compatibility studies to prove the fact that your product are indeed reusable.
So in terms of the maybe demand that are coming from the manufacturer. So as you mentioned, those demands like I just need this or I just need that, etc. So are you also, as a laboratory, here to guide them and tell them be careful of this or be careful of that, or you should look also at this, or we have other customers that are similar and we have also look at that? So is there some kind of this consulting or advice part that is provided also by you?
Yeah, the approach that we take, we normally tend to talk about the case studies or the examples that we've done in the past, like success stories. So, we obviously, our customers are the ones that need to make the decision, but we try to provide them with enough information to say, look, what we've done previously for this customer that has a similar product, the similar approach is X, Y, Z. And the reason why we've done it is because if you look at the MDR requirements, if you look at your risk file, this information would satisfy as a mitigation action, etc. And mostly it's all fine. They take the point, they thank us for that. We don't essentially position ourselves as consultants, but we understand standards really well. That's our business. That's what we do. And we want to make sure that our reports are rock solid, so they would never get stuck with the notifying body. So we feel as if we have to make sure that if we see a mistake, we tell you to say, look, please consider that. And most likely they're not. They go back and consult with the regulatory department, etc., and say, yeah, I think that's fine. So we've seen in the past where they come in with a very small requirement, very niche. I just need you to do half cycle once. And we say, no, let's do it in triplicate. You'll have an average. You'll have better, validation data, and they would be happy to say, yeah, thanks. I think that's a good call. So.
I think it's great also because mainly, if they arrive with a certain demand and you just execute knowing already that it's bad or it's not good or it's not complete, can be also, I think, damaging for a laboratory to say, oh, they are bad because they didn't inform us about this or about that. So I suppose this is also important to show knowledge and expertise for this kind of things.
And I think as a scientist, we sometimes get carried away because we absolutely enjoy what we're doing. Like we can talk for hours about the lab and how fun it is and, whatever organisms. But at the end of the day, what manufacturers need is that report. And that report should give you, your market access. So as much as, it's quite fun, because we definitely like to explain the process and to make sure that everybody, kind of on the same page. But we just want to make sure that our reports are, are rock solid. So therefore, we don't want to just to do the thing and then that you're going to fail. We want to make sure that you do the right thing and you pass the first time.
Exactly. One demand that I had from some manufacturers, and I want to see if you had the same, is for example, they have a line of products and it's the same instrument but multiple sizes, or some instruments that are really complex and some that are really simple, etc. And they say to me, can I test only one of it and it will be valid for all the others? So did you have this kind of demand?
Yeah, I think that's very, very well. That's not a unique problem because you're probably going to find out that those companies, they already sell these products. They've been in the market for a while. Some of them are, 30 million turnover businesses, and they have a portfolio, hundreds, if not thousands of products. So it's not unusual then for them to think, well, how many products do I test? And our advice is normally look at your risk file. You're probably going to find out if you look at your product portfolio, some of those products are quite simple. They're flat spatulas, etc., made out of stainless steel, but some of them are quite complex. So I think it's fine for you to pick most complex products that represent that group of portfolio or your products, and then test those. And then you can work with your risk management file to say, well, the reason why we've tested those because they are indeed complex. So I don't have to go and test every single one. I think that would be unsustainable. But assuming they use the same material exposed to the same process, it's a similar process when you choose where do you inoculate. You choose the worst location. So like you look for a hinge or something. So it's not unusual. And I think you're right. When we spoke with manufacturers, they get really spooked about, oh, wow, well, I have to do all hundreds of my products. Say, no, pick 6, 7, 10. What represents your portfolio and focus on those. And if you have enough safety data for those, you should be fine with the rest of them.
Yeah, and we, as a consultant, I think I worked also for a lot of big medical device manufacturers for surgical instruments, and for this, what we are doing is that we are creating a worst case product. We tried. I mean, I had the imagination to try to create the magic worst case product that I can use for any instruments ever. So I would just have to test that and it should be fine. But yeah, it starts to be a bit complicated with a lot of holes, small holes, big holes, rough surface, etc. with this thing. So you start to think about that. But at the end, just take the worst. First, what we are doing is that you are grouping your products in things that what they are doing and the shape and everything. And then from each group, you take one that is the worst case for it. And then, as you said, at the end, from 1,000 products, maybe you reach with 6 references that are the worst case.
Yeah.
And you have to reevaluate this worst case each time you have a new product that is coming on your line of products to see if this is still the worst case or not. So yeah, don't worry. Don't need to test everything. You have a strategy also to reduce that.
I think is a really valid point because I went to this conference last year. I think it was September last year in Belgium. And I've heard this person saying that, look, there's no such thing as more important medical device. You can't swallow a pacemaker. You need that surgical instrument. But I think so many surgical instrument manufacturers are being put off because they have big portfolios, established relationships, and they just need to see a way out. And I feel there is a way out. There's a process that you can follow, establish what is your worst case, look at your products, find out what's a good representative sample and submit that, and you will get your certificate in the end. And I think that's the message that we were trying to kind of communicate instead of just allowing your certificate to expire, which is no good for both healthcare, because ultimately, at the end of the day, patient risk is at hand here. So we need to make sure that we have enough of surgical instruments on the market to make sure we can continue to support healthcare.
Exactly. And I think surgical instruments starts to be also a bit complex. Because people think when maybe they are not used to that, they think a surgical instrument like just a scalpel, a scissor, or whatever. Yeah. But you have some surgical instruments that are really designed specifically for a certain implant, a certain cut on the bone. Correct. That will be at this angle for this thing. So it's specifically made for this type of surgery or this type of implant. So these are really complex also devices with a lot of things inside, which can be a problem. So don't think it just as a scalpel or scissor. There is really a lot of other instruments that are really dependent here. Tautvydas, so thank you for all those information. So if we want to contact you, so what exactly, if for example test labs, regarding test labs in the UK, what test exactly are you doing? So maybe people can contact you directly.
Yeah. So Test Labs is a UCAS accredited medical device testing laboratory. We're based in the UK, in Peterborough, so not that far away from Cambridge and London. And we specifically focus on RFE validation, whether that's reusable surgical instruments, and every single standard I've just spoke about, that's what we've implemented into our laboratory. So we're quite niche in what we do, but equally we do a lot of material compatibility studies, and whether that's with your stainless steel surgical instrument or more complex devices, or whether that's with your CT scan or your infusion pump. I think our primary focus is to make sure we ensure this compliant medical device supply to healthcare organizations all over the world. So if you have a problem, if you want to validate your surgical instruments fast, because we don't want to keep you waiting, we've specifically designed all of those tests following those standards to be able to produce these results. Yes, so follow us on Test Labs UK LinkedIn page or testlabsuk.com webpage, and yeah, get in touch, and we can obviously support.
Sure, and I will put all those information on the show notes, so please go on the show notes and just click on the link and you'll find all the information. And if you have any question about class 1 air device or whatever, you can just ping, I suppose, Tautvydas on LinkedIn and ask him maybe his advice for maybe your specific case, and I'm sure he can help you a lot.
Excellent.
Tautvydas, so thank you really for your support, for all the information. I hope people will be engaged on that. As I mentioned, there is an extension period for people to continue to be on the market as class 1. But as I'm always saying, this extension period is important to be managed correctly by the manufacturers and not wait until the end to start to think about how you can move now to the MDR, how you can contact the notified body. So start your process now, start already to think about it now, so that you can be on a good shape when everything will be launched from the EU MDR side. Okay, Tautvydas, so thank you very much. Thanks for all your support, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you, Demir.
Bye.